So hi, welcome. Happy International Women's Day. Happy Friday. This is the Getting Started with Archeion workshop. So I'm going to close this. A little bit of context around the workshop first. So what you are looking at right now is the instructional slide deck to learn about Archeion and how to use it. So the slide deck will always be publicly available to you at the URL in the slide, and Teresa just put it in the chat as well. And the slide deck is continuously updated with information, so always be sure to check that last updated date on the first slide. If you want to download the slides, that's okay. Just be aware that they do get refreshed periodically, so you may want to come back to the slide deck URL and re-download them in the future. If you have prior Archeion documentation, I would say scrap it and just refer to this slide deck going forward. I am working on a different version of slides than what's at that link, but the content is exactly the same. And the slide deck contains training from many past Archeion coordinators, but it is now updated by me. So my name is Kelli. I'm the AO's part-time Archeion coordinator. If I haven't met you, hello. I took on this role in January of 2023. I'm also an AO board member, a prior AO board member from about a decade ago. And I work full-time at U of T as a digital initiatives librarian. I have an MLIS with a focus on archival studies and past career experience working in archives. But for the last decade, my career at U of T has been building technology services around digital access and discovery for archives and special collections. My pronouns are she, her. I'm white, able-bodied, the ancestor of settlers, and I work on the traditional territory of many nations, including the Mississaugas of the Credit, Huron-Wendat, and the Seneca in Toronto or Tekaronto. I'm not a processing archivist, so you all will have likely much more experience and expertise on doing description work. What I hope to help you all with is offering thoughts about how we use Archeion as a community, use the service in an efficient way to improve access to Ontario's documentary heritage for the users that visit Archeion to find the information that they need. Also, thanks to some of the wonderful folks here today who've had really great feedback, questions, and ideas for additions into the slide deck. I learn a lot from hearing about your different use cases. So please just always reach out if you have any corrections, feedback, or ideas for additions to the slide deck. You can get in touch with me. Oops, there we go. So the slide deck is organized to provide an overview of what Archeion is, who can use it, and how to sign up, and provide ideas for why you would add your institution to Archeion. The bulk of the slide deck's 200 plus slides, there's a lot of slides, is specific instructions and tips for using Archeion. We won't cover everything in detail today, so just know you can always refer back to the slides as you're using Archeion over time. The slide deck is the main resource you'll want to become familiar with as you use Archeion. And it's really intended to capture the shared practices and community use of Archeion. Archeion is one system, one database, and because it is shared, there are certain considerations and decisions you do have to make when you're adding data, just to accommodate the fact that it is a shared system. And also our shared practices are going to evolve over time. So the training document is considered a living document. Things may change in the future. So as we'll discuss today, Archeion as a service uses the platform called Access to Memory. So Archeion is not AtoM. AtoM is just the tool that we use for Archeion as our shared archival description database. And AtoM as a platform has its own official documentation at the link in the slide, and Teresa just shared it in the chat. And we also just had folks from the company that maintains the AtoM platform, Artifactual Systems. They just came 2 weeks ago, so perhaps some of you were at that session, and they gave an overview of AtoM as a platform, and that's available as a recording on the AO YouTube account. So their presentation and the official AtoM documentation are other really great resources that you'll want to be familiar with as you start using Archeion or resume using Archeion. But this deck, if there was a documentation in the official, if in the official documentation there's a task described from Artifactual Systems in the official AtoM documentation, I didn't replicate those tasks. You can just refer to the AtoM documentation. So there's a lot of links within the slide deck that reference out to the official documentation, just to explain that. And the workshop today and the slide deck is more about developing shared practices of using AtoM in the context of the Archeion service. And it's this idea of shared practices that I've been working on building for Archeion in my role as Archeion coordinator, this idea of how do we collectively use the single shared database and maintain the data over time and efficiently use this shared infrastructure and capacity that the AAO provides to our community by providing the Archeion service. So this deck is for you all to learn all these different things about Archeion and then match what I say to your own institutional goals and reasons for considering Archeion, because I know you all have different use cases, but just to underscore that underneath all of this training, the Archeion service is really for you as much as it is for the end users searching for archival descriptions. And this workshop is for you. So please raise your hand, add a comment into the chat. There are no bad questions or bad ideas. If something doesn't make sense to you, just speak up. It's probably because I'm not explaining it well. And also, if you have ideas about the service or ways to do things, let us know, because in a lot of cases, you have different expertise than I do in the system, and great experience. Quick flag, don't log into Archeion. If everyone logs into Archeion right now and makes changes, I don't know what will happen to the system. Sometimes it times out. So as we're going through things, please don't log in and try to do things on to your profile, or just make a list and save it for later to go back into the system to do the work that you want to do. There is a demo site though. So as I'm speaking, if you want to have, the Zoom open and then a second window open with the Archeion or the AtoM demo site, this is the AtoM demo site, not Archeion. This demo site is a place where you can test things, and you never want to add test data or kind of like garbagey data into Archeion, because it is a public live site that people can search and browse publicly. If for whatever reason one day you need to test something in Archeion, you can just send me an email and we can look at your use case and find a way for you to create test data, or you can use the AtoM demo site here that's linked in the slides, and Teresa put it in the chat. Okay, so we're going to get started. Please, again, interrupt me if you have any questions or ideas, and we can talk through anything that doesn't make sense. So what specifically is Archeion? So Archeion is Ontario's archival information network. It's publicly available. It is available in bilingual languages. The French language, there's some translation stuff going on, but generally you have an English interface and a French interface if you need to. Not all of the description content is translated into French, but the interface itself is bilingual, and we'll talk a bit about that in the future slides. And the intent of Archeion is for archives and memory institutions to manage their archival descriptions and materials. Archeion enables archives and memory institutions to make their collections discoverable for research and other use. So it's really about access and also your institution's ability to manage your description data in Archeion if you don't have your own internal archival description database. So this is just a snapshot of where Archeion's at right now. There's 195 institutions, over 23,000 digital objects, either linked or actually uploaded to Archeion, and over 114,000 descriptions at all levels. So it's going well. Archeion, it has a lot of data in it, and it's a really valuable resource. It's also a free service. So all you need to use Archeion is to be an actual archival institution, and then also have an institutional membership with the Archives Association of Ontario. And anyone with an institutional membership with the AO who meets the criteria of being an institution can add their data to Archeion, or just even set up a profile in Archeion that links to their institution. And you also have access to the Archeion coordinator, which that role is currently filled by me, for onboarding and tips for using the system. And in the slides, I've linked out to a page about Archeion's history on the AO website, which is a really interesting to see how the service got started. And it's been around for 14 years, which is quite a long time for a technology service, especially it's been using AtoM since 2011, and that's a really great length of time to be using a technology platform. Just want to underscore that technology platforms expire so frequently, and we've been using AtoM for 10 years, which is wonderful. And the maintenance and management of Archeion actually comes from a Canadian software company many of you are probably familiar with, called Artifactual Systems. So we get community support we get hosting support from them. The AO pays an annual fee for hosting, and then we get an AtoM instance that is shareable across Ontario archives. And every year, the AO pays this hosting fee, and then we all get access to it, which is pretty amazing. And then there's also something called the AtoM Foundation, which is a relatively new organization that is sort of steering the direction of the access to memory platform and where it goes in future. So Artifactual Systems maintains the platform, and then there's this community around AtoM through the AtoM Foundation. And we're currently running AtoM version 2.7, and this is important to know if you're looking at any of the official AtoM documentation, it's all versioned, because with each version, sometimes changes happen. So it's always good to know what version of AtoM Archeion is running for when you're looking at the documentation. All of the links on the slide always go to the latest documentation. So they'll actually point you to the latest AtoM release, which is 2.8, but we're actually running 2.7, so you can just change the number to 2.7 in the link or just use the 2.8 documentation, and it should be relatively similar. So again, it's a free service. You just need to sign up for an AAO institutional membership. I think most of you here already have your institutional memberships, and then can begin using the system after you contact me and do a little bit of onboarding. If you're a new staff member to an institution that already has an institutional record in Archeion, I just suggest we connect and talk about use cases a bit before we set up your login. Otherwise, I just set up your login and you have all of the documentation to go through asynchronously. So this is a little snapshot of the institutions in Archeion as of March 5th. And I just want to underscore again that each institution has its own context and needs for the Archeion service. So you can see most of the institutions who are active in Archeion are the 1 to 4 staff. So the sort of, smaller archives who may not have their own archival description database, a lot of volunteer organizations as well. But we do have larger archives using it for access as well. So I kind of contextualize Archeion usage into 3 sort of hierarchies. So the base level is you're adding your institutional record into Archeion and using it as an institutional directory and participating in it that way, so that when users come to Archeion, they can find your institution at the bare minimum. And then you can link out to your own internal archival discovery database. You don't have to add your descriptions into Archeion if you don't want to. And then at the sort of middle level, maybe you have an institutional profile, you're adding your authority records to Archeion. I'll explain what authority records are in a moment. And maybe like bare bones archival description data because you have your own internal database. So you just want like some access to be facilitated through Archeion to guide users to your own internal system. And then the third tier is full on using Archeion as your main archival description database where you're actually managing your own descriptions. And I always try to underscore like it's that third level that is really the importance of Archeion. A lot of the institutions who are using it wouldn't have access to archival description technology if it weren't for this service. So, even if you have your own archival description database where your users are coming and searching things, we still really need Archeion in the community to facilitate access to sort of the smaller community archives who just wouldn't have access to AtoM if it were not for the Archeion service. So yeah, there's different folks using the system and everyone has different needs out of it, but just generally it's a really important service being provided to the Ontario Archives community through the AAO, providing access to archival description software for a really good price. So these slides are just about what the AAO is. I feel like most of you here know what the AAO is, so I'm just going to skip through these. And we'll get to how you actually use Archeion. So I feel like most of you probably know this. Most of you are active users, but if you're not, it's all web-based. So that means that you don't have to download any software. You just connect with the Archeion coordinator and get a user account, and then you log in through the web interface. You go to archeion.ca, and then you click on the little login button, and then simply log in with the information. Everyone forgets their password, and it is okay to contact me if you forget your password. That's 50% of this job is just resetting passwords. And unfortunately, there's no public interface for you to reset it on your own. You actually have to email me to get it reset. So just never hesitate to do that. That's fine. Once you're logged in, you'll see the little toolbar at the top that shows you that you're logged in. And as of last year, I've attached all of the Archeion IDs per institution to all of our user accounts. So now we're able to see which user accounts belong to which institution. which helps with database maintenance. So please don't change your username. It's helpful for me because it helps me track who's in the system and which institution has logins. So just leave your username alone, please. And then you can change your profile if you need to change your email or something like that. You can click on my profile, and then it shows you this little interface where you can edit it. And then this is important because if you ever need to change your password, if you're having staff changes, if you have a login for like volunteers or students in Archeion and you want to reset the password when a new volunteer or student comes in, you want to come here to reset the password so that your passwords are secure. And in the slides, there's documentation, a link out to the official documentation of how to reset it. So once you're logged in, it's kind of overwhelming. There's a lot of different things you can do in the system. There's all these different buttons. So we're going to walk through exactly how to start using Archeion from the beginning and what I see as the order of importance. And before I sort of give logins to people, I generally recommend that you're reading through the official AtoM documentation so that you understand the system, because there's so many things you can do in it. So allowing yourself to understand what everything is before you start adding data to the system is a really good idea. So just I'm promoting the official AtoM documentation because it's really awesome at onboarding you to the actual AtoM system. And also to pause for sort of, you know, if you're a smaller institution where like a membership to the AAO really requires a lot of advocacy to your administration. These are just some reasons I've heard of why people use Archeion. So first of all, if you don't have an archival description database, again, the AAO membership is a really cost-effective way to get access to really amazing archival description software like Access to Memory. And it also allows you to enhance the discoverability of your description data by putting that data into the shared database that gets a lot of visits. It has excellent search rankings in Google. We are one of the top searches if somebody's searching for like, you know, like I'm trying to think of an example of a phone. I can't think of one. Anyways, if somebody types in somebody's name and then like archives or anything like that, Archeion will be one of the first Google search results. And it also gets a high number of page views by folks every month. It's also standards based. So you yourself don't have to know the standards off by heart. I know a lot of the volunteer organizations, you know, not all of their staff knows the rules for archival description. AtoM has a really nice web interface when you're filling in data that you don't necessarily need expertise in RAD to fill out the forms, but then behind the scenes, the database is enforcing standards control onto your data, so you can export it into different standardized formats, which is really useful. For some people, they don't care as much about cross-institutional discovery, but I think that's a really amazing aspect of Archeion. It allows our users to see that some records from a given person or organization belong to this institution and other records are available at this institution. And I'll show you when we talk about authority records how that comes up. But to me, that's one of the big values of Archeion to our end users, is making it easier to find records of folks across Ontario archives. And then you also get free support. You just have free consultation built in when you sign up for Archeion from somebody. It may not always be me, but all of our Archeion coordinators have expertise in AtoM and a lot of expertise on archival description discovery. So why not take advantage of a free consultant on that? So hopefully those points help with any administrative advocacy around why you would use Archeion. If you have others, I'm always happy to hear other reasons that folks use it. So this is the big part of the slide deck where it's Archeion specific instructions, and it's organized into sections. And maybe some of you are like, oh, this is a weird organization, but to me, these are sort of the steps that when I'm onboarding people, that I go through to talk about different use cases. So first we want to know the editing basics of AtoM, because there's a lot of gotchas. Then we go through the institutional profiles and how to set those up and different considerations. Then we actually go through the organization of Archeion, how to search and browse and different export features that it has. And then I'm going to focus heavily on authority records because I feel like those are probably the most important entities that you add into the system. And then we'll talk about archival description, which I know people think like, oh, the archival description form is the most important, but I actually think it's the authority records. And then we'll talk about considerations for access points, digital objects, and migrating and bulk uploads, which I won't go into too much detail because there's so much information there, but we can cover it a bit and you can post questions as well. Okay, so this section is all about editing basics. We did some Zoom drop-ins last summer, and there is actually a recording as well for this section. So you can refer back to that. It's linked in the slides. And this is sort of like things to please remember as you're logging into Archeion and making edits. And I did get a question. I have had a few questions over the last year about when you're adding data to AtoM, like we don't have an export to records in context. Records in context is a new standard that's coming from the International Council of Archives. So folks have been like, oh, how should I use AtoM if we're trying to get ready for records in context or RIC? So version 1 of RIC was just released in January of 2024. And my personal take on this is if you're using Archeion and you're worried about RIC coming down the road in terms of standardizing your data, don't worry about it. Just leave it alone. The system doesn't understand RIC yet. RIC is new. Just don't worry about it. The more important thing to do is to focus on creating well-structured and consistently structured descriptions in Archeion, because we're not ready for RIC. I know it's happening in the International Archives community, but in Ontario, it's not happening yet. So just don't worry about it. I also think it's noteworthy that access to memory isn't yet supporting records in context. And the Society of American Archivists Standards Committee actually just posted that they're delaying integration with RIC until its application is more fully considered. So don't worry about RIC. That's my statement today. I hope it's okay to say that publicly. Okay, so some of the editing basics in AtoM. Remember that Archeion uses technology, uses AtoM that's purpose-built for archives. So it's based on archival standards. So you don't really necessarily need to know the standards, but every field that you enter data into in AtoM is referring back to a field that has instructions around it through various standards like rules for archival description or the standard for authority records, or your institutional profile also refers to ISAR, the standard for institutions. So we'll go through those. So just remember everything under AtoM is tied to archival standards, but the front end interface, you don't have to know those standards to use it. So that's one thing. The second thing is to know that AtoM, when you're filling in data, it does not use HTML. So if you're trying to add an italic or a bold or a list, HTML is not going to work. You have to use something called Markdown. So I'm not going to demo Markdown today, but I've referred in the slides to the Markdown guide. So what that does is if you want to add italics or bold, for example, you put little stars around the text and then that bolds it in the front end interface. So I would suggest to folks, if you're concerned about how you format text in your description data, read the Markdown guide, and then that's how you format text. I've noticed that some folks kind of struggle with like lists and things in different authority records. So just read that guide and that's going to tell you how to format the data properly. And if you're filling in data in the form with Markdown, similarly, if you're doing CSV imports or bulk imports, you also need to use Markdown syntax. So again, like using the little stars around the text rather than the bold tags. What is the third thing? Just remember you have to be an active institutional member. So I do disable logins if you don't renew your membership. I've been doing that. Well, I've only been around for less than a year, but I did that last year to just go through and make sure that all the user counts in the system are from active memberships. So if you forget to renew, don't worry about it. Just go to the AO website and you can renew your membership, and then I can re-enable the login for you. And then just remember, it's a shared database once again, so just be respectful and a good Archeion community member. Don't edit descriptions outside of your own institution. There is a way to track that for me. There's a backend description updates tool, so I can see when updates are made. But yeah, if you see an error, an issue in another institution's records, you're not responsible for that. Just email either the institution if you're comfortable, or just email me and I can facilitate any changes if you spot errors. So that's those intros for editing basics. I'm also linking in the slides to something called Things I'd Wish I Had Known About AtoM, and that's from Artifactual Systems, and it just has some really good tips and tricks and gotchas that AtoM has. So that slide deck is really a good overview for starting to use the system. And the main thing to know from that slide deck is that because Archeion is web-based, you're logging in through a browser, you may experience a session timeout. So what that means is you're logged in, and we'll probably see it today when I get to the demo parts. I'll be logged out even though I logged in previously. You're logged in, and after about 20 minutes to half an hour, it actually logs you out because your session has expired. I'm just going to take a sip of tea. Sorry, one sec. So this is important to know before you get started. Tell all your students, tell all your volunteers, tell anyone editing in Archeion, save your work often, because you could be in an archival description form, filling out the form, thinking you're logged in, and then you're going to click save after 2 hours, and it actually locks you out, and you've lost your data, you've lost your editing. So I always recommend that people save their work every 30 minutes, and that's a safe time for not getting logged out of the system. And the artifactual system slide deck explains why that happens a little bit more. Unfortunately, it's not something we can change. So just heads up, save your work often. Another common gotcha when you're editing in Archeion is that you don't have to add the creator information and the repository information at lower level descriptions. So because AtoM is built for archival description data, it knows to inherit those things at lower level records. So you're going to create a phone level record or a collection level record. You're going to add your repository information and the creator information. You don't need to re-add that when you add the series, file, or item descriptions. It just gets inherited. If the creator is different, of course, you can add a different creator at lower levels, but you don't need to re-add that every single time. And same with your CSVs. You don't have to add the creator name, it gets inherited. The other gotcha that I experienced many hours of tidy up time from this is that AtoM has these drop downs, and the drop downs are sometimes referencing existing information in the system. So a good example of this is the repository field when you're filling in descriptions, when you're adding yourself as a maintainer for an authority record, which I will explain in future slides. The repository field is referencing actual institutional profiles. So if I'm typing in Fisher on these slides, you can see it pops up and it says, oh, you're trying to attach this description to the Thomas Fisher Rare Book Library. So these dropdowns are so sensitive that if you copy and paste the name of the institution or whatever data you're trying to add, it will create a different record sometimes if you copy and paste. So I always say, just type in the first 3 letters, wait for it to populate, and then select it so that you're not creating duplicate data. And this happens as well with languages, access points, like names, places, and subjects. Any creator information and the repository field, it's really easy to create duplicate data if you type the word in instead of selecting what pops up. So that's another thing I just flag for everyone. Again, tell all your staff using Archeion, if they're using Archeion, just don't do that. Don't copy and paste into these fields. Wait until it populates. So those are the gotchas. This section is about your institutional profile. So if you're joining Archeion, this is the first thing that you're gonna do. You're gonna set up your institutional profile. And again, there's another instructional video. If you don't want to listen to this whole recording, you can just go to the instructional video to learn more about the institutional profile setup process. So if you don't have a profile, all you need to do is email me and have an AO website or AO institutional membership, and then I onboard you and set you up. When you're set up, you get something called an Archeion ID, and the Archeion ID stays with your institution no matter what. It's not attached to you as a staff person, it's attached to the actual institution, and the ID number never changes if your institutional name changes, for example. So a great example of that is TMU, right? Before it was Ryerson, and now it's called TMU. And the ID for that institution is staying consistent, but the name has actually changed. And that just helps with database consistency to tie the records to the ID and not the actual name of the institution. But I will flag that when your institution is created, the name of your institution becomes the URL for the institution. So the URL to your institution in Archeion is not the ID, it's actually the name. So you kind of have to consider how you name your institution because it becomes the URL. And then we generally don't want to change the URL once your institution's been created. but the ID keeps it consistent in the database if your name does change in the future. So there are 6 minimum fields that we want people to be filling in for the Archeion institutional profile. I'll probably repeat this, but AtoM has so many fields, and you can spend a lot of time filling in so much detail into each and every field, but you don't need to feel like you have to fill in everything. So these are just the 6 that I recommend. So it's the name of your archives, you need that, the Archeion identifier number, which I assign. You don't make that up. I make it up and I give it to you from a list. And then the third is the type of archives, which is selected from the Archeion repository types taxonomy. And then we always want the full address of your institution, of course, and the contact information so that users can get in touch with you. You know, Archeion as an institutional directory, we want the contact information to be fresh and up to date and not outdated. Please update your website if the website changes. Those have to be active links. If they get to be broken links, if it's an old link to an old website and your IT staff have changed the URL, just come in and edit it because the broken links impact the search engine optimization of Archeion. So keep your contact information fresh. And finally, the opening times and how people can physically access you are also great information to have for end users. And I'm also including a suggestion that you can also link out to your own internal archival description database. You don't have to use Archeion for descriptions. If you want to just make an institutional profile and then point people to your own internal institutional finding aid database, that's great. That's a great way to facilitate connection between Archeion and your own institution's finding aid database. So the field to use for that is the finding aids, guides, and publications fields. And I've gone through Archeion and made that consistent for each institution as of earlier this year. So just make sure you use that field if you're pointing out to your own internal database. And there's also a website field as well for like your institutional website link, but the finding aids database is really to point people to your discovery database if you have your own internal one at your institution. So here's an example of an Archeion profile that was completed by Laurentian last year, and I knew it was fresh because I helped support them setting it up. So that's why they're used as the example. I'm sorry, it's kind of blurry. You can see the name of the archives in the authorized form of name field, and then any parallel names as well. So the parallel names help with searching. If you're doing translations, you don't have to include the translation in that parallel form, but you can. There's also a way to add a translation of the institutional repository record if you need to do that. And then you'll see all the other information that we talked about. So this, oh my gosh, this is very blurry now that I'm seeing it on the big screen. I'm so sorry. This is all the contact information fully completed and with an up-to-date and active email and website. And then below that, you'll see the opening times of the archives as well. So it's not a significant amount of information, but it's complete, right? It helps users be like, oh, this is the institution, here's the information I can get, and how to access them. So it helps with people connecting with you and contacting you. And again, all of this information is editable by you when you're logged in, and it is your responsibility to keep up to date, though I try to support if I notice information out of date. Sometimes I'll go in and correct things. So once you log in, the way to edit is you just scroll down, you click edit, and then you get presented with this form. And then that reveals the institutional profile edit form. And again, if you don't have a login to update your profile, you can just email me and we can get you set up. So in terms of the institutional profile edit form, it is based on the International Council on Archives International Standard for describing institutions with archival holdings, the longest standard name ever. And I've linked in the slides to where that standard exists, so you can read through it. Again, you don't have to fill in every field on the profile, but every field does connect back to this, this standard, and each field has this sort of number related to it. So what that does is it's showing you that that field is related to that rule in the ISDIA standard. I don't know if I'm saying that correctly, ISDIA. But anyways, so you can refer back to the ISDIA standard. If you're like, what is this field? What do I fill into this field? Just refer to the standard, and then that will tell you what you're supposed to add into that field and provide guidelines as well. So yeah, this is just saying you can keep both the edit form public and along with the standard. If you want to refer back to the standard, you don't have to though. It's pretty self-explanatory. And then there's also really great documentation from artifactual systems about filling in the editing profile as well. So that's not present in the slide deck. You can look at the public AtoM official documentation to look at that for filling in the institutional profile. And again, yeah, I'm not going to walk through editing it. There's lots of external documentation to learn how to edit your institutional profile. What is important to know is that there's core things in Archeion that we want to keep consistent across the institutional profiles. So first, please keep your profile up to date. This is a little bit of begging that if you have an institutional profile, just make sure you're checking it at least annually to make sure that the information is up to date. And sometimes people are confused about where to edit the contact information, and it is kind of hidden. It's this little pencil icon. It says contact person at the top heading, which confuses people. It's not the contact person, it's the full contact information edit form. So you click the little pencil icon, and then that pops up this tab where you actually enter all of your contact information. And the tab has multiple windows, right? So you have to click through all of the windows to fill in the information. So just make sure you're filling in each tab, and then you click submit to make your updates. And I just see Shernette's comment. Sorry, Shernette, I just saw this. Yes, so if you're adding your link to your own internal database in the finding aids field, it's not pulling in any data. It's not pulling in any of your description data or your authority record data. All it's doing is pointing users to say, hey, this institution has these descriptions over here, and they're not in Archeion. When we talk about the clipboard, I am going to talk through about institutions who have their own institutional AtoM instance and some ideas for how we can facilitate getting the data into Archeion. But that's, again, your own personal consideration, because you then have to maintain the data that's deposited into Archeion. So we just have to talk through capacity around if you have your own AtoM instance, do you want to put the description data into Archeion? Maybe the maintenance is lower if you're just linking to that database instead. And I will open, I'll just quickly show the example institution that I was going to show for that. Oops, what am I doing? Sorry. This one. So here's the City of Ottawa Archives, who the holdings information is kind of legacy data. They haven't really been adding too many phone descriptions over the years, but they do have this awesome database. So why not, when users who are looking for archives in Archeion, instead of just having your institutional profile and saying contact us, why not just point them directly to where your archival descriptions are, and then they can go and search that. But adding the link to this field isn't pulling any data into the system. It's just pointing them to your external discovery system. Should editing be done through, thanks, you're welcome, specific browser? I'd always just recommend people use Chrome when they're editing. Sorry, use Chrome. And if you do have if you're using a specific browser because you're limited to the browser at your institution and you do experience issues, please let me know, because then I would report those issues back to artifactual systems, because it might be a bug in cross-browser testing. Hopefully artifactual systems in maintaining AtoM are doing cross-browser testing. They're testing new AtoM releases in Safari and Firefox and Chrome. But if you do experience a bug, if you're using Safari or Firefox or another browser, just let me know, and then we'll report it back to artifactual systems. But generally, I say please use Chrome. All right. Thank you for asking questions. And so in terms of flagging the Archeion specific fields to consider when you're filling in your institutional profile, I just want you to know that the city field in the contact area does show up in the Archeion institutional browse page. So if you have a user who's coming to Archeion and they're trying to find institutions in their area, the city field is a really good one to make sure you're filling in consistently. And you can kind of browse the locality field on the institutional search page to make sure you're using consistent terms. So for example, an example of deviating from what is consistently in the database is, say, well, actually this one has York. Your institution is located in Toronto, but you say like Toronto parentheses Scarborough or something like that, then that field is going to become inconsistently sorted with the other institutions within that locality. So I always just say, look on the institutional browse page in locality if you're confused about what to enter as your city. And then just make it as consistent as possible with the other institutions that are in the platform, because this is one of our sortable fields for institutions. And then the other field in Archeion that needs to be flagged for consistency is the type field. So this isn't in the contact area form. It's in the identity area form, and it is one of those dropdowns. So if someone is searching Archeion and they want to find all of the religious archives in Archeion, they would click on the religious organization facet that is on the institutional browse page, and that's coming from this type field. So if you notice that not all institutions do use the type field, but it really helps kind of surface and group the institutions in Archeion. So I would recommend folks do use that. And then this is a controlled term field. You need to select from the existing archive type, from the existing repository type taxonomy. So you don't want to enter a new type into this. You should be using what's already there. If you do have a different type word to add to the taxonomy, just email me and we can consider adding it. And I do periodically go through those and try to tidy them up, but it's just a good one for you to know about as you're maintaining your institutional profile. The other field that I'm still thinking through is the thematic area field, which some institutions use and some institutions do not use. Again, if you have ideas for terms you want to add, let me know. It's a little inconsistently applied, but it's something to consider using if you want to surface your institution in Archeion's institutional browse page through one of the existing thematic terms. So just select from the existing terms if one of them applies to your institution, and then that just helps with the search facets on the institutional browse page to sort of group institutions for end users. I would not recommend using the geographic subregions access point right now. The list isn't controlled. So an issue with that, for example, is if I go to the institutional browse page, and sorry, there are future slides explaining how to navigate all these different buttons, but this is the institutional browse page. So yeah, the geographic subregions are not like there's 195 institutions and then there's not many not many down here. So for example, like Thunder Bay technically would be in the locality field, right? We don't really need it in the geographic subregions. And same with like Ottawa, Ontario. Ottawa would be in the locality field. So I'm thinking through maybe in the future we'll use the geographic subregion for the chapter that the institution belongs to, but I haven't yet cleaned that up. So I'm just kind of suggesting that people ignore that. If you have ideas, let me know. But yeah, it's not the best search facet because it's not really well used. And then here's the thematic area information that we have so far. Again, not really applied that frequently, so there's only a few institutions represented in the search facets here. So we want to get more institutions applying the thematic areas so that folks can find the type of archives that they're looking for from the institution browse page. Okay, and then I feel like Sarah and Raven did a really good job of showing you how to customize your profile. So I'm not going to cover how to customize your profile. Again, there's links here, and also if you want to watch their recording for how you actually do that. First, I would say if you want to customize your institutional profile, read through the documentation to understand what's correct. But the thing to note here is that through your editor account, you actually do have a lot of control over how the system looks, and then that can go very bad depending on what colors you choose and how you style the institutional profile, which I'll show you a slide at the end of this section to explain why. But basically, if you're adding CSS customizations, like color customizations to your institutional profile, we just still have to make sure that it is consistent with the WCAG AA guidelines for contrast. So that's web accessibility. So we have to comply with AODA in Ontario, which means we have to make sure that the colors we're choosing meet the contrast level of WCAG AA. So yeah, just be careful when you're editing your profile. I want to encourage editing your institutional profile with caution. So I'm gonna skip through most of these because Sarah and Raven's session dealt with it, but I use Guelph as a good example for, customizing the look and feel so that when a user lands on your institutional profile in Archeion, they're like, oh, this is Guelph. And then the color and the logo follow the different descriptions that people land on that are from Guelph. So it gives a kind of brand and presence to your descriptions in Archeion if you're editing your profile. Sorry. And they use this section quite well to sort of guide people to different things that they want to highlight in Archeion. So editing that little blurb of HTML can be really handy to just highlight different things to institutions. And then I also always suggest that folks add a banner. It looks so nice and fresh, and like Archeion is updated when there's a logo and a banner. So please, if you have an institutional profile, always add a logo and suggest adding a banner because they look great. Sorry. If you're not comfortable adding a block of text like Guelph has done, but you want to highlight something on your profile, you can just email me the text and I'm happy to begin adding custom HTML to or custom markdown for your profile so that you have that group of text highlighting things and guiding users. You don't have to know how to edit the theme. If you don't want to, you can always ask for support. So this is a slide just showing what we do for when we're doing testing of any new website at my other job with U of T. We always do a mobile view of it. So I've linked in the slides to how you can do that. But basically in a Chrome browser, you can right click and click inspect. And then it'll give you an option to view the page on a mobile phone display. And then that just helps you, make sure that the information looks right on a mobile view. So if you do add a little HTML blurb, you want to make sure that it's not kind of cut off and that it navigates okay for an end user. And then the other thing I do need you to check if you're customizing your profile is, again, if you are able to download things at your institutions. I know not most people are able to, but if you can download the Chrome Wave extension and just check the color contrast. If you're like, I have no idea how to do that, there's no way I'm doing that, but I do want to update my institutional profile so that it is branded a little bit, just contact me and say, hey, I updated it. Can you just check that the contrast in the mobile view looks okay? And I'm happy to check for you. All right, so the other feature that you get in Archeion that can be handy is page view statistics. I know a lot of people love these, and I was on the board actually when we got them developed, so I love them as well, but they are coming to a close. So they have been around for about a decade, and Artifactual Systems have let us know that there's not going to be any more Archeion specific page view stats as of AtoM version 2.9. So again, we're on 2.7. Once we go to 2.9, the page view stats are gone. So that's going to be in 2024 or early 2025. So you can use them for now. It might be a good idea to familiarize yourself with them and possibly export them if you want to save them for historical reasons. So you can go to your institutional profile. If you scroll down when you're logged in, you have to be logged in to see these. You'll see this little label that says reports, and then that gives you access to your page view reports. What did I want to highlight here? I won't explain how the page view module works. That's in the slide notes if you want to know more about the backend logistics of what that's doing. But just know that these stats count each page of a given description anytime anyone views it. So if you view it, if you're going to that description 200 times in a week, it's going to count your login view of that of that page view as well as an external user. So the views are a little bit inflated because they look great because you're accessing your own descriptions. And then it's, again, not counting each user, it's counting each time that page was visited. So a lot of times if you're editing a description, then that kind of inflates the page views. What that means is that the Archeion page views, if you do use them and you do export them, they're always going to be significantly higher than the statistics you can see in Google Analytics 4. Not all of you are set up for per institution viewing of Google Analytics 4. If you want that, let me know. But it does take a bit of time to set you up for that. So generally, I just release the general Archeion Google Analytics stats, and then you have access to the page view stats, but page views are going away. So if you're concerned about stats in Archeion, let me know and we can discuss that. Okay. And then the other feature of AtoM that I can provide to you is not accessible to your editor accounts, but it's accessible to the Archeion coordinator admin account, is this thing called AtoM description updates. So if you have student staff, for example, or volunteer staff in the back end of the AtoM database, it tracks every edit made to authority records, terms like taxonomy, subjects, places, your institutional record, and your descriptions. So if at the end of the month or the end of the year, you want to see your stats for your institution, then I can pull those stats from you and it shows creation, revisions, and if that's at all helpful for you, it is available. So I feel like we haven't been highlighting that feature exists too much to Archeion users, but I find it really helpful at U of T for our U of T system for tracking. So yeah, just know that it's there. And the link on the slide goes to the artifactual systems documentation for it if you want to learn more about what you can get out of the description updates. And then finally, in terms of stats, we're of course tracked via Google Analytics. Because of permissions management, I can't give all 195 institutions logins to our Google Analytics. So we are still kind of figuring out how we expose Google Analytics to each institution. But right now I'm publishing our Looker Studio reports. So every month there's an Archeion Looker Studio report. So if you do need stats to justify usage of Archeion, those are available publicly for you. And the stats are always linked on the About Archeion page. So I add them here every month. So you have access to the Archeion stats. Okay, so here's where we'll go through a little bit more about the interface of AtoM. I feel like, again, probably a lot of you understand this, you're frequent users, but we'll just go through how to sort of get around Archeion. So again, everyone who comes to Archeion who doesn't have a login, they can search, browse, and export public information in Archeion. But if you have draft information, we'll go through that a bit more at the description when we're talking about descriptions. If you have draft descriptions, it's not going to show up in the search, it's not going to show up in the browse, and people can't view or export your draft descriptions. So if you have stuff you don't want people to see, then keep it in draft. The draft setting only works for descriptions, though. Your institutional profile and your authority records are always public to folks who don't have a login. So just know that your authority records that you create from your description, even if your description is set to draft, your authority records will still be publicly searchable and browsable. And then I just see a question from the stats. Can we know the number of people who use particular institutions' records? So the page view stats right now in Archeion, they'll show you the number of views that a description gets. And I'll really quickly demo. So right now, what we have available and have had available for over 10 years is this Archeion page view stats module that the AO actually sponsored to get into Archeion, but Artifactual Systems has said we can't maintain this anymore. Please use Google Analytics instead. But setting up the Google Analytics is a bit more complicated than just providing 195 institutions access to that. So we're still thinking through that. Anyways, when I'm logged in, which I am logged out now, sorry, I'm going to log into my editor account so you can see the editor interface. That's my password. It is good. So I'm logged in now and I'm at an institutional record page. If I scroll down to reports, I see this page views, and the page views give me the number of views per phone. And you can also sort that by date. So this is the feature, the stats feature of Archeion that is going away. So I'm flagging it now because if institutions do want to use Archeion stats, we have to find a way for you to use it through Google Analytics. And right now I only have a cross-repository analytics for everyone. So if you have an interest in a use case where you really need stats for your own institution, please contact me as soon as you can, because the page view stats that we have available are going to go away. And this just counts the page views. It's not counting the number of people, but in Google Analytics, if I go to a report to show you, in Google Analytics, you can see the number of users, but it's Archeion wide. So for example, last July, we had 7,000 users coming to Archeion, but that's for everyone. It's not just folks coming to your single institution. So if you have an interest in stats, there's ways we can find a solution for you, but I'm just doing it for folks who need it. If you don't need stats, it's a little bit of a time-consuming process to get you set up with the Google Analytics stats. So please only contact me for access to Google Analytics if Archeion is your only archival description database and you need those stats for reporting. Let me know as soon as possible, because the page view stats will go away, so you won't have those. And it takes a little bit of time to set up on Google Analytics. So I hope that answers the question. Okay, so public and draft. I hope that was understood. Public stuff, all searchable, all browser. Okay, cool, great. And then draft information, not searchable, not browsable, except for your institutional information and your authority record. So when you come to Archeion, this is the layout if you're not logged in. So the site logo, it'll always take you back to the home page. The browse menu sorts the different types of information in Archeion. So it helps you browse, institutions, authority records, descriptions. I've heard some people say like they'll create a description and then they're adding an authority record, and then they kind of lose where the authority record has been created. So the browse menu is a way to just go to the authority records and see a list of them so you can quickly edit. And then the search box, which is you can just enter any keywords, and we'll talk about search in a moment. And then there's the clipboard button. The clipboard is very, very powerful in AtoM, and I'm going to talk about it in a moment. But this clipboard button, I wish people used it more. It's so handy. And then there's a language menu, so you can use the language menu to toggle. There is a section in the slide deck about languages and being careful about language toggling. I'm going to flag here, and I'll probably repeat it if we get to the language section. I'm just looking at the time, and I don't know if we will. But the language menu, if you change the language to French, and then you go to your institution and you create a description in English, that description will actually have the French language applied to it. So just always be careful that if you are kind of playing around with the language button, make sure you go back to the language that you're trying to create the information in, even for authority records and your institutional record. Just make sure you're back on English before you create any data, because the language setting that you're currently on is what gets applied to the data that you create. So as a front-end user, as a regular user not logged in, it's really nice to be able to easily switch the languages around. But when you're editing, just make sure you're on the language that you're trying to create description data or institutional data or authority record data in, because the language setting gets applied to whatever you create. So that's a little world globe thing. And then the information icon is the quick links menu. And I just want to talk about the pages on Archeion. So I've done some work in the past year to put more, sorry, that's going off. Put more information about using Archeion in these quick links. So obviously there's the home button, there's the about page that we were just on that talks about the system. There's a brief search page that provides help, which I'm going to be building out a bit more about this in the next year. And then if you are not an institution, there's just a little FAQ about joining Archeion, which is hopefully helpful and provides more context about the service. And then there is this handy letter of understanding for archives in using Archeion that just sort of lays out not like a legally binding, but a more informal agreement of like who is responsible for what. So it just lays out what the AAO's role is in providing the Archeion service, what the Archeion coordinator's role is, and then what your role is as an institution. So that's handy to know about if you want to read through that eventually. And then there's also a generic privacy policy that just talks about the data that's stored in Archeion. And to be honest with you, this is kind of a generic statement that just comes along with AtoM when you install it. I haven't edited it heavily, but it's helpful to know about the privacy of the data that's stored in Archeion, so you can check that out too. So those are all the quick links. Some folks may not know that there's information about Archeion in Archeion, so you can refer back to those if that's helpful. And then there is also the login button. So that's the layout of the top browse. And these are pretty self-explanatory slides. I just wanted to flag that the browse dropdown, the labels are not always intuitive for new AtoM users. So people and organizations, that label means authority records. So those are the records about people and organizations that we'll cover. And then archival institutions is your institutional profile. And then these second last two, subjects and places, those are just lists of access points. So just a list of subject terms and place points, and then digital objects as well. So just know that those labels are not always intuitive for end users. So everyone knows how to search, but we always just flag that it's not like Google. It's not predictive. It's really sensitive towards language, and it doesn't give you all the results. What it does is it groups the results by type of record or entity type in AtoM or Archeion. So again, there's archival descriptions. Not again, I haven't covered that slide yet, but I'll talk about the different entity types in a moment. So when you type in a word into the search box, just know it can be kind of confusing. It's giving you a list of types of records. So first it's giving you archival description records. So wherever John appears in an archival description, it's showing you those first. And again, it prioritizes those because it's an archival description discovery database. So it's showing you the descriptions first. And then it shows you anytime John appears in an archival institution, anytime John appears in an authority record, and then it's showing me places where John appears. So just know that when you're typing in and this pops up, it's not showing you, it's showing you information of grouped by type of record. So if you click on the archival institution, you're going to land there. You're not going to land on a search result that's all of anywhere John appears for archival descriptions. If you want that, you should not use this. You should click all matching descriptions under descriptions rather than going directly to what it's suggesting. I hope that makes sense. Just know that the search box retrieves results based on type of record. There's also some advanced search features that you can get really specific with. This is just showing how to drill down to that. I'm not going to cover this because we won't have enough time. But just you can filter results based on your institution and based on any of the advanced search fields. So the advanced search fields have specific fields available, and each type of record, institutions, authority records, descriptions have their own advanced search pages. And you can, for example, limit descriptions to your own repository from that advanced search. But I wanted to point out that some fields in AtoM are not in the advanced search, and these fields can actually be really handy for maintaining your data in Archeion. So in the slides, I've just put a ton of information about what I call expert searching, and Artifactual Systems provides a lot of documentation about how to do that. There's examples in the slides as well. So here, what you're doing is you're not searching a field that's publicly available in the advanced search field. You're using the kind of like hidden database fields to find information. So a use case of why I would recommend learning about this if you're a frequent AtoM user and you're going to spend a lot of time putting description into Archeion is, for example, you can find all of your draft descriptions so that, if you're like, oh, I don't know which of my 100 descriptions are still in draft, you can actually perform an expert search to retrieve those, and then you can quickly publish them. So the expert search is really helpful for managing your data in AtoM and in Archeion. So if you're a heavy user, I just recommend going through those instructions. And then, okay, I just need to say how much I love the AtoM clipboard. So all of the data in AtoM, in any AtoM instance in Archeion, can be exported via this clipboard feature. So if you perform a set of search results, you can clipboard all of it, and then it gets tagged into this clipboard. And all of the slides have the links to the related documentation with more information. So you can, go to the descriptions, for example, that you want to clipboard, go click, add them, and then they get added to the clipboard. And then you can export this data to a spreadsheet. I'm going to guess not a lot of people are probably exporting to XML. So don't worry about the XML export, which is on the next few slides. But you can export to spreadsheet, which makes reviewing your data so much easier when you have it in a spreadsheet and you can see the columns and do sorting. So I really recommend learning about the clipboard feature if you're using Archeion for description work, because it means you can be reviewing your data in a spreadsheet format and doing more with it than you can do one by one in Archeion, because there's no batch update process in Archeion. It's only through spreadsheets, right? So you may have noticed, all of you that I've been in touch with over the last year, I send you the spreadsheet of your data because it makes it a little bit easier for reviewing and catching different information. It's also really helpful to see consistency across your descriptions and where maybe there's places to improve consistency of description data to facilitate discovery. So anyways, once it's in the clipboard, you can click export. And the export is based on the different entities. So you have archival description data that you can export. If you've added authority records that you want to export, if I don't know why you would export archival institution information as a batch, but if you've tagged a bunch of archival institutions and you want to export that, you have to select the different type of information, and then that generates a different spreadsheet depending on the type of record. And then it gives you this option to export via XML or by CSV. And one thing to note is that you need to be logged in if you want to export any draft descriptions, of course. So if you filled in a bunch of information, or a student, for example, has filled in, or a volunteer has filled in a bunch of information and you want to review that data as a spreadsheet rather than reviewing through Archeion, you can add it to the clipboard after you've logged in and then export the draft descriptions for this method. And then the little button here that says include descendants, that will get you everything. So you don't have to go in and add every single file to the clipboard. You can just add the phone level record that you want to review the lower level descriptions of, and then export that. I can explain that more too when we go through the description part. I already said that. Okay, so the authority records are probably the most neglected record in Archeion, and I'm really trying to be like, oh, the authority records are what kind of facilitates cross-institutional discovery in Archeion. So this is the one entity type in Archeion where I'm really trying to build policy around and promote learning and understanding of why the authority records are so important. So all of this is recorded, so I'm going to go through it kind of quickly because you can refer to the recording of the slides if you need to. But this is how I'm presenting AtoM and presenting the different types of records that you are potentially responsible for as an Archeion user. So your archival institution record, which we've already covered and you're familiar with, you kind of just have to update your archival institution record annually, and then you're done. You never really have to touch it again. So that's one entity. And then you have your archival descriptions, which are if your institution chooses and it meets your context to add your archival descriptions into Archeion, then that's the second level of information that you're going to be responsible for maintaining and adding. And then the third level of entity type is people and organizations or authority records. So that's all the information about the people or organization who are the creators of the records. And the authority records setup is kind of what makes AtoM one of the best archival description platforms to use, because it really prioritizes the information about the creator and ties it to the description data really, really well. So another simplified way to visualize this is that an institution, your institution, has archival descriptions, and then those archival descriptions have authority records that are maintained by the institution. So each of these three entity types are connected in the database, and I'll explain why that's important in a minute. If you're looking for where the authority records are in the user interface, it's the people and organizations label. And for discovery purposes, the authority records kind of act as the entryway into an institution's records, because most often people are Googling names, right? So most often people will land on the authority record and then get into the description, because it says, you know, George has records at here, here's the description. So really folks are most often landing on the people and organizations page. And that's because the authorized form of name that you enter for an authority record, in the URL of the authority record, it gets that person's name. And so when you put their name in the URL, it has a really high search engine ranking. So all that to say, authority records are most often where people are landing, and most often what's surfacing in search results in things like Google and things like that. Yes. So a minute to talk about sharing authority records. We don't want to be creating duplicate authority records in Archeion because of that connection, right? We want people to say, oh, Jim Tester has records here, and he also has records here, and I can go to these two institutions to find his records. So you always want to be making sure that you're creating an authority record that is new and doesn't already exist in the system. And I know it is, we have to share the authority records basically because it's a shared system, right? So we'll have one repository as a maintaining repository of Jim Tester, and then another repository who will be adding information about that same person to the authority record. And then I've been adding in information about the other institution in a different field, just so it's obvious to the user which institution has been adding information to that authority record. So other provincial portals do it differently, where they duplicate the authority records, but then that's decreasing an end user's ability to see which description is tied to that person. So in Archeion, we only create one authority record per person. And then, yeah, there is a bit of collaboration with the other institution who shares that authority record, just to make sure that the biographical sketch, the history section, represents both descriptions at each institution. So because they're so important for information retrieval, we did just publish a policy. I feel like I've sent out lots of communications around that, but the policy is linked to the slide and linked in the slides, and that lays out how to create an authority record and just the minimum requirements for an authority record. Please don't create empty authority records. There's a lot in Archeion, you know, that are just the name, and then there's not a lot of context. So please refer to the policy when you're creating authority records. I'm just going to read through the questions. What is the policy if two authority records were to share a name, for example, two John Smiths? So that is also why the date information is very important, so we can be distinguishing between authority records. Let's see how many John Smiths are in Archeion actually. And that will help with demoing. I want rise from a name, sorry. Oh boy, okay. So, and then here's a good example. Thank you for this example. So there's not the authority record policy recommends formatting of names, and why that is important is for sorting and searching. So try to always, I know not every institution does this, so you don't have to go back and change all of your legacy descriptions, but going forward, please always do the last name, comma, first name convention, and then try not to include dates in the authorized form of name, at least initially, because that gets included in the URL, and like the dates of the person will change, right? Unless they've already passed away. But if we are putting the beginning dates in the URL, then we can't update it in the future because once this URL is created, that's it. So I always say, don't include the dates in the authorized form of name upon first creation because we don't want them in the URL. You can go back and add them later after the URL, after the record has been created, because then it doesn't get added to the URL. So just flagging that as one thing. And then for distinguishing, you can add the date information, which it looks like this person hasn't done. So sorry, whoever's description this is, I'm going to edit it. So just to help distinguish this John Smith from the other ones in the database, what I'm going to do is I'm going to add the dates of existence. I don't know if there's an end date for this person right now, but anyways, save. And then if I go back and search again for where John Smith is the authorized form of name, what did I do? Maybe I didn't put quote last time. Here we go. I feel like it didn't save. Oh, there is. Now the date appears there, so it just distinguishes. So dates are really incredible. Don't put the date in the authorized form of name field though. Put the date in the date field, the actual date field right here. And then that distinguishes it from other John Smiths. The other thing that's really handy is you can add if the person is in, I know not everyone in Archeion is going to be in an external authority like LC name authority file or VF, but if the person is like a big enough presence that they have an official name authority file, I would recommend that you add a VF link. So I don't know if someone from the ROM is here, but thank you, Royal Ontario Museum. You're doing fantastic work adding the VF authorities. So there's a field in the authority records, and this is all in the policy. When you read through the policy, the authority record identifier, if you go to something like VF, they'll have a permalink to that authority record file. And then this adds a unique ID to that person. So if we have a context of Archeion having two John Smiths and they have the same birth and death dates, for example, adding an authority record identifier is something that can help distinguish them. The other thing that can help is creating your own authority record identifier, and that's a policy that needs to be developed. I know some institutions do add their own internal authority record identifiers to their Archeion authorities. So that's something that we can work out as well. But yeah, distinguishing by dates and then also filling in the information. It's hard to tell from our John Smith search if there's no information to those records. We won't know, like at least here it's, you know, there's dates and there's information so we can distinguish. But if folks are just adding empty authority records, then we can't distinguish it well. So yeah, filling out authority records, adding dates in the dates field, not in the authorized form of name field, can really help with that, and also adding identifiers. Can there ever be a way to change the institution managing one authority record? Yes. So I'm gonna go back to my ROM results. If, for example, you are working on Elizabeth Walker, so right now Elizabeth Walker is maintained by the ROM. If for whatever reason you also have records with Elizabeth Walker, you can reach out to me or reach out to the ROM and say, hey, actually, can I become the maintaining repository of this authority record? We really want to manage this. And then it does become a cross-institutional collaboration to make sure that the authority record information represents the information both institutions want. And then the second part of this question is, for example, we have multiple people's collections where the donor shows up in passing somewhere else, but we have more materials and information about them. 100%, that's the context of Archeion, right? Like if you have records about one person and then there's information about that person in Archeion, that's where you want to be connecting the description that you add to Archeion to their existing authority record. In terms of who gets added as the maintaining repository, I feel like the person who first created it is probably going to add themselves as the maintained by, but then we can add other information to say like this authority record is also maintained by this institution. hope that makes sense. Oh my gosh, I'm running out of time. So I'm gonna keep going. I knew this was gonna be a struggle to get through, but I didn't realize. I'm going to skip through all the standardization, but again, going back to that conversation around records and context and where are we going with our archival description data, I don't know, probably in the next 10 years, there will be a lot of changes in archival description standards. So let's make sure that we're adding authority record data that is consistent part and has like shared practices around it. We're doing authority record data consistently across our institutions. If your institution is adding authority record data to Archeion, and then that's going to set us up really well for whatever changes because the data will be somewhat normalized. So just recognize that the authority records are based on standards. It is complying, the form you see when you're adding an authority record is based on the ICA's authority record standard. So it's helpful to know that and refer back to that. You don't have to know the standard, but just know that, you know, there are some rules around what data goes into the authority record, and then just always refer back, please, to the Archeion authority record policy. And if you have any feedback or questions about it, some folks have already, we'll be reviewing it annually. So the thing I want to point out about authority records is that authority records get created when you add a creator to your description, but they also get created when you add a name access point. I love access points. They're excellent for discovery. They help users. But if you are adding name access points just as a giant list in Archeion, you are also responsible for maintaining those name access points. So if you add 20 name access points, you got to go back to the authority record. You have to add yourself as a maintaining repository. You have to fill in the type of record. And ideally, you're filling information about the person. Otherwise, we get empty names in Archeion that are not meaningful to end users. So you have the name in your description, but then you also have this empty authority record. So I'm just flagging that when you are adding description data, the authority record is created at the point of adding an actor, but also the name access point. And so if you're adding name access points, you do need to maintain those and add yourself as the maintaining repository for that name. Always just check to see if somebody has created an authority record for the person that you're adding descriptions for before you create your archival description. So before you even get to adding archival descriptions into the system, you really want to be setting up yourself by filling in the authority records first and checking if they already exist in the system. And again, just for dropdowns, when you are adding the creator name to your descriptions, because these dropdowns are so sensitive in AtoM, you don't want to be copying and pasting the name. You want to be typing in the first 3 letters, waiting for the dropdown, and then selecting from the dropdown the correct access point. Back to, I think it was Joel's questions, Joel's question about John Smith's. Sometimes from this dropdown, you can't tell who's the right authority if somebody shares the name. So sometimes I do go in and I'll like leave a little star or something beside the right authority record, so I know that's the correct one to select, and then I'll go back and I'll just remove the star. Just sometimes it's you know, it's not obvious from the dropdown which one is the right authority record if they have the same name. So that's something I do to get around that if there's a big long list of like John Smiths, to know which one is the right one to select. But ideally the names have dates attached to them, and it's easy to spot them. Okay, I'm going to skip through these ones. No duplicates. We don't want duplicates. This goes through how to create one, which I feel like the steps for that are fairly simple. So again, I'm just flagging the like high level things that you need to think about. I am suggesting that folks copy, if there is an existing name authority for that person, I do suggest copying the name from VF or from the LC name authority file into the authorized form of name, just so we're trying to name people consistently. I know a lot of people are entering descriptions for folks where they're not in LC and AF, they're not in VF. So you can just use the last name, first name method for that. I don't yet have recommendations for religious organizations, buildings, or corporations. So those are naming conventions we can work on adding policies for in the future. But there are existing recommendations for how to name those in other standards, so you can refer to those. And again, just please do not include dates in the authorized form of name at the first point of creating it, because it gets tagged in the URL, and then that has maintenance implications if the URL is not it doesn't have the ending date, for example. So this is just displaying the ending date issue where this authorized form of name was added, and the birth date is there, but this artist has passed away, so now the URL just has their birth date but no end date. So to keep the URLs nice and clean, we just don't want the dates in the URLs. Unless you know the death date, then that's fine because it's not going to change. But don't include the birth date. If that doesn't make sense, let me know. I sometimes struggle explaining that. And then this is just explaining the other forms of name fields, which can be really helpful for discovery as well. If you have acronyms or different names, I do encourage folks to enter information. So a lot of the time, people are really concerned about the time-consuming nature of adding description data, but actually the authority record data requires quite a bit of filling in and time to complete. So just flagging that. Another thing to know is that the dates of existence is marked as required. Sarah and Raven talked about this in their presentation a bit as well, where some records are marked as required in AtoM, and Archeion will actually feed you an error if you don't fill in the information, but sometimes you don't have the dates of existence and you have to leave this blank. So you may receive an error message at one point. There. You'll receive a dates of existence error message. It's okay. You don't have to worry about this. It's still created the person. But just know that it's marked as required, but what is marked as required in the user interface is not what's required in our Archeion policy. So I would say go from the authority record Archeion policy when you're creating your authority records. This stuff is just going through the different fields that are required in the Archeion authority record. I am really trying to connect the authority records to their maintaining repository. So if you do create an authority record, please add your repository as a maintaining repository if you're creating a new one, so that we know which institution is responsible for which authority record. And then there's other fields that I'm not going to cover right now. Don't use subject and place access points in the authority records. I know some people do, and some people use the occupation area. But it's not consistently applied. So if your institution is using it and it works for you, that's fine, keep doing it. But for new folks who are starting to add their authority records, I would just say, please don't do this because it's not controlled right now. So as a discovery tool across Archeion, subject and place and occupation access points for authority records is not very helpful. And then this is just reminding you to save your work and click create when you're done. That's the database. So you can change your own authority records at any time, but I'm really recommending that folks get in touch with other institutions or me to facilitate any changes to other institutions' authority records, just so it's nice and shared. Bye, Sharnette. Thanks for coming. I hope it's helpful. Yep, so there's 30 minutes left. Thank you. Just please get in touch if there's issues with other authority records in the system. There's also relationships areas which can facilitate discovery, but I'm going to skip through those. And there's tips in the slides. And then you can also do expert searching with authority records as well. And there's tips for how that can help you maintain your authority records in the slides. Okay, so we're going to really briefly cover archival description. I feel like this is an area where people have the most questions, but actually the preceding stuff is stuff that if you are onboarding new staff and are training them on how to use Archeion, all the preceding slides, those are actually the things that I think people struggle with even more than the descriptions, because we're more familiar with the description data. So this section I'm also going to cover really quickly because there is a recording as well from our Zoom drop-ins from last year. And I'm actually going to do this live. That's probably easier. So I think the struggle with descriptions is figuring out the workflow that works for your institution for adding them. So there's two different ways. One, you can just kind of log in and come and add the description and then fill in the form. But another easier way is to actually go to your institution, because then it kind of oh no, Aaron, if Aaron's here, go back to your institutional profile because your name got changed. Uh-oh. oh no, and then it looks like, okay, this is interesting. Somebody has added institutional profile as a holding. So just these are some of the cleanup tasks that the Archeion coordinator has to deal with. Anyways, I'll come back to these. I'm going to go to the AGO. So I think Al might be here. So pretend I'm adding a description for the AGO, coming to your institutional profile. It's okay, Erin, don't worry. Thank you. This will automatically fill in the institutional information. So that just makes it like one less, database error, which we see are easily occurs in AtoM and Archeion. So going to your institution and then adding from your institution is one tip I would give. And then the other thing I would recommend is that you're not, you're creating the full level and then you're creating like the skeleton structure of your series here. So instead of like creating the phone level, saving, and then, adding a description for the series, adding, you can actually just add the child levels for your series here. And then that makes it a bit quicker to facilitate. And also, if you do have your own archival database, another really great consideration with support from the Archeion coordinator is you don't have to manually add your description data. We can do CSV import. So for example, one of the things that I need to recommend to our U of T folks is let's do OISE, for example. So OISE library has its own AtoM interface, a really easy way to facilitate data transfer between our systems. And again, this is a consideration for your institution to make because once the data is in Archeion, you are responsible for maintaining it. So if you just want to have your institutional profile point to an external database discovery system, you can do that in the finding aids field, like what we looked at for the city of Ottawa. And then that's almost no maintenance, right? You're just maintaining the link that goes to your external discovery interface. But if you do want your authority records and your descriptions in Archeion, a really easy way to do that is to just add the holdings to your clipboard. And then what that does is I will show you. So I'm going to add these to the clipboard from my external non-Archeion AtoM database, which many of us use. I'm adding, I'm going to the clipboard. And then I'm going to export. I'm going to go to CSV. I'm going to include all the descendants and I'm going to click export. It's going to generate. It's running and it's generating the CSV. I should have done this before. Anyways, it's giving me a CSV that's already formatted for AtoM. So what you could do as an external institution that has its own AtoM database is just send me the CSV as the Archeion coordinator, export the related authority records, send me the authority record export, and then we can get that data into Archeion. So that's kind of one of the magic benefits of Archeion using AtoM is that AtoM is so well used in our archival community across Canada that if we have other AtoM institutions using it, we can just be using the clipboard to be exporting the descriptions and getting that data into the system. Similarly, if you are exporting from another database platform like InMagic or Monesis or something, there's always a CSV export. So it's just a matter of getting that data into the CSV, contacting the Archeion coordinator, mapping the data, and then ingesting it. There's obviously a little bit more work to it than that, but I just wanted to flag that the description work doesn't have to be so time consuming. So all the steps for actually adding a description and tips and tricks are in the slides. So I'm not going to cover those. We can always have more. This is kind of the easy part of Archeion, adding description data. So we can schedule a different one about that. Sorry for taking so much time. And then there's also tips for creating lower level descriptions in the slides as well. There's also a duplicate feature too. So if you have a description where you would like to duplicate it, you can do that if that's easier than adding the lower level child from the phone level. And the whole slide deck marks off what you could include, what you could not include. There's a lot of fields. Again, you don't have to fill in all the fields. Think about discovery when you're doing the metadata. If you're just adding data for the sake of adding data, it's not helping with discovery. It's not helping you maintain the actual descriptions. you don't necessarily have to add it, especially if you have an external database managing your descriptions that is not Archeion. I will skip over all of this. I didn't demo how the creator gets added. If anyone's confused about that, let me know, and I can demo how the creator gets added at the point of descriptions, but otherwise it's just in the slide deck. There are more sections of the slide deck, so I'm going to keep going. If you are adding draft descriptions, flagging that you can batch update lower level descriptions to publish them. Sarah and Raven demoed this, but it's a really important thing to know. You don't have to publish each lower level description, you just publish the top level. Somebody asked me if it's possible to hide fields, to have kind of like an archivist note field in Archeion, and no, it is not. So this slide explains, no, all the fields, once you publish them, they are public. So for example, donor information and accession information that you may not want to be public, don't put that in Archeion. Once you publish the description, all of the fields are public. And that is explaining that. Again, you can include a link to an externally hosted finding aid if you're not uploading it directly into Archeion, but just flagging that you're then responsible for the maintenance of that. This talks about uploading PDF finding aids versus generating PDF finding aids, which I'm not going to cover today because I want to have a separate session eventually about PDF finding aids because there's a lot of issues around those and accessibility. That most often PDFs are not screen reader friendly, which means we are failing AODA if you're uploading a PDF that is not optimized for a screen reader. So there are directions on that in the slide deck, but if you have questions about uploading PDFs, please get in touch with me and I'd like to set up a separate session about this. Generating finding aids, uploading a finding aid. There's information about language options. If you do need to add translations, you have to have a translator user group to your account. So if you need to do translations, you have to let me know and then I can apply that. If you don't have a translator user group, then you're not able to add descriptions in a separate language. And this is just covering some of the description issues that can occur with languages. So I'm going to leave that. We kind of talked about it a little bit. I will flag that if you're on a different language, it'll appear in the URL. So that's one way to know if you're on a different language and you're creating a description. Just look at the URL and make sure that you're on the language that you're trying to create the description in. And there, we haven't talked about bulk records, so I won't talk about bulk translations. If you have a different language that you need to add to Archeion, let me know. But right now, these are the options that are available. And I'm not going to have time for access points, but I do want to make a general note that access points in Archeion are not currently controlled. I do review them every month when I'm doing the stats. So I try to tidy up the place names. We always want to make sure that we're nesting place names. So for example, there's a place name for Ontario. You want to nest any city that you're adding as a place under Ontario instead of doing Toronto, Ontario, because Toronto, Ontario will become its own term. So you want to create the Toronto place name and then make sure it's nested under Ontario. I'll show you what that looks like. If you're adding places, please get in touch because it can get messy. Here's some messy ones we'll have to clean up later. So for example, there's Hamilton and I think maybe this one's correct. I don't think so. It's nested under Ontario, which is correct, but I don't know why there's not more Hamiltons. Anyways, you just want to make sure that you're nesting the place names so that they're grouped and not doing like Hamilton, Ontario. Okay, I'm going to skip through this because I want to get to digital objects. Okay, so Archeion can store digital objects. My personal take, some institutions use Archeion for digital object storage, and that's great, that's fine. There's a policy around extra storage. You get, oh geez, I can't remember how much you get when you first sign up. I think it's 2 gigabytes, maybe it's 1, I can't remember, I'm sorry, I should know that. So you do get some storage when you sign up for Archeion. If you need additional storage, then we have an annual fee that we charge. I personally don't think that AtoM is the best digital asset management system, so I personally don't recommend that you upload digital objects directly to Archeion. I think a better option is to have an external place where you're storing the digital objects and then use a link feature. So every description can be linked out to a digital object, and then that creates this kind of beautiful display. Guelph is one of the institutions that does upload, which is fantastic. It's awesome. But there's just other tools that can store digital objects that might be cheaper and easier for digital asset management. So when you go to a description, if you do want to link out to an external digital object for an item, you can go to the bottom of the description, click more, and link out to digital object. And this is a really great way to facilitate discovery of digital objects alongside your description. So if you have any questions about doing that, please feel free to reach out. And if you have a huge collection, but only one description in Archeion, there's ways to present that big collection as one item and then push out to the larger digital collection. So we can talk about that. There's only about 15 minutes left. I just wanted to flag the linking issue of digital objects for you, and also flag that you are responsible for copyright and privacy of anything that you put into Archeion. So you're responsible for clearing that before you upload them. But yeah, I think maybe we will leave the last 15 minutes as questions. If not, if nobody has any questions, I can also talk through the bulk uploads information, but this is a whole bulk uploads are a whole other session. So I'm going to pause. Let me know if you have any questions in our last 15 minutes. I just saw Aaron's comment. Oh no. I hope I didn't confuse things now seeing this institutional repository. Okay, great. I'm seeing a lot of refreshers. If you're a longtime Archeion user too, the thing I'm wondering about is like what do you feel not supported by, or what do you feel like would be helpful for the coordinator portion of the service to help you do things, I guess. Because sometimes I'm like, I don't know where to start in terms of helping institutions, and I think everyone has different needs too. So if there are instructional things that you feel like you want more information about, just feel free to get in touch. If you're doing a big system migration, I'm happy to provide any help on those. We've done lots of those at U of T too, so I have lots of documentation. Yeah, I don't know what else should I flag in the last 15 minutes. In the slide deck, there are slides from the 2022 session that Jasmine did about bulk uploading. And those are really fantastic and give you more guidance about doing bulk uploads through CSV, which is a huge topic. Thanks for everyone mentioning in the chat that you have to run off. That's okay. Thank you. Yeah, and also I think we don't always have to be caught on like, oh, if I have a lot of records, I have to do the bulk uploading. We don't have to put all the information in Archeion to facilitate discovery, right? You can just have a phone level record and then a PDF attached. You don't always have to be putting the lower level description data. There's some context for when you would want to do that, but really thinking about why you're using Archeion, what you have, and how to actually facilitate discovery can help, instead of just kind of like jumping into the system, adding description data, ignoring your authority records. Like I think we have to change how we're approaching Archeion to think through more what kind of discovery you're trying to do, what you're trying to get out of the system, and then that can kind of dictate what data you add, and then maybe reduce some of the maintenance and the description time in the database. So I'm just seeing another question. As someone who is completely new to Archeion, it might be nice to be able to differentiate in the interface what fields are great to use and the fields you mentioned aren't supported, and what we should not focus on. So that's a great like context question. And I think that's one of the benefits of Archeion is you have the Archeion coordinator to consult with. So you could say, here's what I have. I'm trying to, surface these records for these reasons. And then I have 2 hours or I have 10 hours a month. Like it might depend on your context of how much time you have to invest too. And that will change what you actually put into the system and what you can get, sort of like the fields that are going to give you the most going to give your users the most relevancy is kind of based on the context of your institution. So if you only have 2 hours a month, I might say just do phone level, and do like bare bones, a few fields. Here are the fields that are going to help users, and then do that, and then fill out your authority record, and then you're done for the month. Whereas if you have more staff time, then maybe we can talk through some other ways that you want to present the records to your users that you have more time to do. So it's all just weighing resources versus against the description data. Obviously, if you're using Archeion as your sole archival description platform, you're going to put in more data because you need that data to manage your records, right? So it's all context driven, and that's what makes these presentations impossible, because I'm trying to think of all the different contexts you all have. So yeah, I would just say just reach out and we could talk through what you're trying to do with Archeion, and then that might guide field usage. I think that's it. And then the other thing to know about Archeion is that it's one provincial portal, right? We have the other provincial portals across Canada. I don't think there's any territory portals. And then eventually there is an initiative to revive adding descriptions from Archeion back into Archives Canada, which a time ago was our national portal, but has not been updated for some time. So just thinking through that eventually will resume, might change the context for how you use Archeion as well. And I'm happy to talk about that with anyone. And then it's also just one AtoM instance that's part of a larger community. So one of the things I'm trying to encouraging is folks to use the AtoM Google group. I'm here for questions always, but if you have something that you're not sure about, we have a whole international community of AtoM users who have lots of expertise. So you can also be using the Google group to ask questions as well. So yeah, I hope that was helpful. I'm sorry it was so rushed, but yeah, there's a lot of information. So I was like, I'll just give an overview from the slides, and then clearly ran out of demo time. But I hope it was helpful. Get in touch if you have any other questions or need any support with anything.